Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. Today, I'm just so really excited. I get to chat with the amazing Marion Nestle. She has been a lifelong leader of the Food for Health movement and is an expert on nutrition, dietary choices, and food policy. She is a voice of reason when it comes to talking about food and nutrition and food and agricultural policies and what they should look like and who should benefit from them. She has spent her life really sharing her knowledge with so many students during her time as the Paulette Goddard Professor of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health at New York University. I did not have the honor of being one of her students, but I have learned so much from her many books, her website, as well as hearing her speak at food tank summits and other conferences. And I just want to thank you, Marion. You've been a great mentor to so many of us. And especially to me, I feel like I've learned so much of what I know about food and nutrition and food policy from you. So thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So I want to start talking about your book first. Let's Ask Marion, because I love everything about this book. I love the size. It's really aesthetically pleasing. It reminds me of a tiny thesaurus that I carried around in high school. I feel like it is a good reference book. And so I want to just ask you why you decided to write this with Carrie Truman.
First of all, it's my version of Mao's Little Red Book. This
This is
tiny
great.
little thing. And I was asked by University of California Press to, they complained. They published several of my books, and they complained that they're so long. They're 500
Mhm.
pages. They have 1,000 references. They really require a lot from readers. Couldn't I do a just little short summary that just somebody could pick up and read? And I said, no. Absolutely not. I can't do that. Slight has been interested in doing that, in part because I had written a column for the San Francisco Chronicle for 5 years, some years ago, and they were really hard for me to write. It was
Sure.
supposed to be a Q&A, and nobody ever asked any questions, and so I had to come up with the topics, and it just seemed sloggingly difficult, and I just
Mm.
didn't want to do it. And then I thought, wait a minute, Q&A. I used to answer Carrie Truman's questions when Carrie, who's a friend of mine, was writing a blog called Eating Liberally. Every now
Mhm.
and then she would ask me a question, and her questions were clever, and they were fun, and they were interesting, and they were things that I was really interested in writing about. She would send me these things. They were 100 or 200 words. And I would sit down and just whip off answers. It was just a pleasure to do it. Uh,
Yeah.
and so she posted them on her website. I posted them on my website. And she posted them under the title, Let's Ask Marion. So
Mhm.
in a sense, this book is her title. And I certainly couldn't have done it without her. And so she agreed to do this for this book, and we were off and running. And we agreed in advance kind of what the basic topic areas would be, that there would be six questions about healthy diets, and six questions about community food politics, six
Sure.
questions about international food politics. And so it would range from the personal to the political with politics and all of it. And that's what we did. And University of California Press did it in this really cute format. I
It's
mean,
great.
I think it's adorable.
It is. Like
So
I want to carry it everywhere. It's so
cute.
great.
Really cute. You can stick it in your pocket. It doesn't take, you don't have to devote hours and hours and hours to reading
Right.
it. And the exciting thing for me about it, and the thing that surprises me, I guess, is people are reading it.
Yeah, they really are.
They
It's great.
really are. And I'm kind of surprised by that, but it's okay. So,
So I think the University of California Press was right that you needed to have something where people could read it, in a sitting or come back to it. And I think that's one of the best things about it. You can go back and forth. You don't have to read it from start to beginning. You can read certain topics. There is a chapter about nutritional value and the environmental impacts of alternative meat products. And I would kind of want to get into that because we're hearing so much about Impossible Foods
Mhm.
and Beyond Meat, and their sales have really skyrocketed, it seems,
Mhm.
during COVID-19. And I wanted, just hear from you what you think about these products, and are they good for us? Are they bad for us?
I think they're fine. I mean, I've tasted them. But my sort of general feeling about it is I don't get it. I don't understand why you need artificial meat. If you don't want to eat meat, don't eat meat. Meat isn't an essential nutrient. Everybody would be healthier. Probably
Sure.
everybody eating less meat. Eating less meat would be much better for the environment. But people tell me that they miss meat.
Mm,
That my favorite comment on it was a parent who told me that, oh, at long last, I can take my child to fast food places and there'll be something there for her to eat. And so this is just outside the way I think about food. I think,
yeah,
I like eating real food. I think people would be healthier eating real food. These are artificial, and so they're outside my radar. And of course, they are what the new buzzword is, which is ultra processed, a
right.
specific category of junk foods that you would be healthier if you avoided. And these meet the definition of ultra processed. They're industrially produced. You can't make them in your home kitchen. They have ingredients that have to be produced. You can't buy those. You can't buy pea protein at a supermarket. You can buy
Sure.
peas, but you can't buy pea protein. They're complicated, and right now they're rocketing in sales. And people tell me that they really like them. Okay, fine. I don't think they're bad for you. Whether
And what
they're
do you
whether they're great for the environment remains to be seen.
Right, that's the question I want to ask. And how do we sort of figure that out?
Well, people are looking at that. There's been one study paid for by the industry that shows that there's certain biochemical markers that are lower in people who substitute meat alternatives for real meat. That may or may not be a benefit. We don't know that yet, but certainly plant-based diets are what everybody is recommending. It's what I recommend,
Hmm.
largely, not necessarily exclusively plant-based diet, but certainly a largely plant-based diet. And these fit into that. And the ultra-processed, you have to figure out, what your values are here and what really matters to you. But as I say, they're off my dietary radar
Sure.
because if I eat meat, I won't eat meat.
Right. I mean, I
No.
think that's such a good point. You can have a plant forward diet without having to turn to these, whether it's Beyond Meat or the Impossible Burger. You can eat more beans and legumes and, other products that are really, really nutritious and honestly less expensive. These products, these new products are kind of costly.
And if you have any cooking ability at all, I happen to like vegetables and like vegetable based meals. Um, and I think you can have delicious food without meat if you don't want to
Right.
eat meat. If you don't want to eat
Right.
meat, I don't know. As I say, they're kind of off my radar.
You
Um,
said, yeah, you said when I asked you this question that you kind of just don't get it. And I wonder if there are other sorts of, issues like this that, people ask you and you're like, no, I just don't get it. I don't get why, you'd be
yeah.
interested in that because you have this instead. Are there other
Well,
issues like that?
oh, supplements just leap to mind. I mean, half of American adults take supplements despite an astonishing research base that shows that they don't make healthy people
Hmm.
healthier. And since healthy people are the people who are taking supplements, people who need them don't take them. I don't understand those either. Why would you? Well, people feel better if they take supplements. That I believe, but it may or may not have anything to do with the supplement itself. And
Right.
they're very poorly regulated, which concerns me a lot. I'd like
Absolutely.
I'd like to know that some functioning government agency, if we have any of those anymore, would be would be nice. I would be nice if somebody was keeping an eye on them.
And it's interesting because the sale of supplements has gone up so much during COVID-19 because people are more interested in their health and staying healthy than ever before. And so, I mean, I think that's the next question I want to ask you about. The tragedy of COVID-19 cannot be disputed, but it has sparked an interest in people, thinking about food more, or worrying about their health more. Do you think that's a sort of a healthy sign that people are, they're cooking? I don't know.
Yeah, it's
I
wonderful. People are cooking more. People are gardening more. At the beginning of the pandemic, you couldn't buy seeds. Now
right,
you can't buy canning jars.
right,
In September, everybody's putting up. I just put up some Concord grape jam, and I didn't have enough jars, and there was no possibility of getting them. They're all sold out. So I think that's great. People rediscovered
right,
growing, preparing, preserving food. It's really fun. You can make really wonderful, delicious things that way and have them around. You can can
right,
and freeze. We have enough tomatoes to last for another year without in the form of sauce. And I think all of these are terrific. And if I think there are two positive things that have come out of the pandemic, and people's personal relationship with food is one of those.
sure,
And the other is recognition of how the food system works in a way that I think people didn't recognize before.
right,
Who knew that meatpacking workers and grocery store clerks were essential to the functioning of society? And these are among the most badly treated and poorly paid workers in our system. Who knew that? Um,
right,
the fact that people recognize that they realize the connection between our food production system and hunger and food insecurity seems really important to me. And also what's happening in schools. The
right.
idea that, oh, what a surprise. Schools are not just about educating kids, they're about feeding kids too. So this realization, um, the recognition of how the politics of the food system works seems to me very, very useful. And I hope that good things will come out of it.
Well, obviously, you've been writing about this issue of food politics for years, and when you wrote your book, Food Politics in 2002, people kind of didn't get it. They're like, "Why is food political?" But now, I mean, we're talking about 18 years later, that food is more political than ever. And I think this book, Let's Ask Marion, comes about at a really crucial point in time, right? We have this election coming up. People, are not only going to vote with their forks like you've encouraged them to do for many years, but they're going to vote with their votes based on what they've seen happen over the last several months. Hopefully, it's and I wonder what you think of this idea of a citizen eater, somebody who actually votes based on their beliefs around the food system.
Well, I think that would be terrific. And I think there are people who do that. I mean, this year, the vote with your vote is to be taken literally. Everybody has to vote this year. Your friends have to vote. Your family has to vote. And every individual should be working on trying to get people to vote. So the vote with your fork, vote with your vote thing that I use all the time, I think both are really important. And I do think that voting with your fork is important. I know there's a lot of criticism of that kind of approach, that it's individual and it's about yummy food and not
Mm,
politics. But I think if you make decisions about what you eat based on your value system, that will influence your friends, your family, and other people, and it'll spread if enough people do it. Without
absolutely.
in any way uh, minimizing the importance of getting involved in politics. And I certainly push the students I teach and everybody I know to get involved in food politics, because it's a way of explaining. I mean, you can explain how the political system works through food in a way
Hmm.
that's very hard to explain in a lot of other ways. So that's why I think people are getting it. Uh,
Yeah,
and that's really useful. I mean, I read the page proofs on this book in April,
sure.
and fortunately, there was a blank page, so I could add something about COVID-19. But I think the book, in the light of COVID-19, written about in this book is even clearer because it's such a good example of the kinds of things, I was talking about.
I would agree, and I just want to read something from the introduction. You were talking about COVID-19, I guess, on that page where you had some extra room, and you say these events call for advocacy for strong government, for strong democratic government and institutions, among them food systems that benefit all members of society, regardless of income, citizenship, race, ethnicity, gender, or age. And so I think it's really a call to action for all of us to become
Mhm.
involved. It's, the personal becomes very political when we talk about food, as you mentioned. You're voting with your fork, but realizing that all of these connections that have come about since COVID, that voting with your fork has a real impact on people. And I think that's the connection that people were missing before COVID, that it wasn't just about their personal health, what they were eating, but it
Mhm.
had this impact on that grocery store worker, that meat processing plant worker, the person who drives the truck that gets your food to the grocery store. People are really seeing all of that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think in a way that was very difficult to see before. And so that's why I think if there's one benefit that comes out of that, that's one of the benefits, is the
Yeah,
realization of those connections that were, school food seemed very abstract to people who didn't have kids in school. And now all of a sudden you realize that there's talk about universal school meals.
right,
This is coming up over and over and over again. And some of us have been advocating for universal school meals for decades. And all of a sudden, it's a public discussion because it's obvious that kids are not being fed adequately if they're not being fed in school. And we
right,
have universal school meals until the end of December.
right.
Let,
Thankfully,
let's keep them going after that. It would solve
right.
a lot of problems.
Yeah, that was a decision that was just made recently by USDA, correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was much needed. And regardless of who, takes over the administration in January, I hope they do continue that because this pandemic will be going on for a while, it looks like.
I'm afraid so.
Absolutely. So, another chapter in your book is about food safety. And you ask in the title, why don't we demand a higher standard of food safety? And that word demand, it has a lot of power behind it. So why should we demand better food safety, Marion?
Because we don't have it. We have constant recalls of food because of salmonella or listeria or the toxic forms of E. coli. I mean, these recalls come one after another after
Hmm.
another, and increasingly among vegetables. And that's because vegetables are grown in fields, and those fields happen to be near concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs, where there are a lot of animals around and their waste is getting into the water supply or dripping onto the land or however it is being transmitted. Then the pathogens that are in that waste get on the vegetables and people
Right.
get sick. And this happens over and over and over again and never stops, even though we now have legislation that covers meat production and vegetable production, meat production with the USDA, vegetable production
Right.
with the FDA. One of the annoying features of the way our government works is that there's a split as if vegetables aren't grown near animals.
Sure.
Um, and we have these laws, but they're not enforced very well. And they need to be enforced better. And it's not that food companies are sitting there thinking, how can we make people sick? It's
Sure.
just being sloppy about how they're producing the food and they're not testing enough. And certainly, if they were serious about producing food safely, they could do it because we know how to produce food safely. We learned that from NASA years ago
Right.
when NASA was worried that astronauts in outer space would get food poisoning, and that would be extremely unpleasant under the situation of zero gravity. You would not want to have anybody getting that kind of sick under zero gravity. So they figured out a way to do it, and
Sure.
and we know how to do it. And the fact that it's not being done has to do a lot, I think, with enforcement and with the culture of food production, that there's no culture of food safety
Right.
in operating plants. All of that could be changed, and it would be changed if there was a big enough stick about it.
Well, and you're right. They're not just being sloppy though. They're actually, killing people, making them sick, and sometimes leading to death. And this is
Mhm.
beyond sloppy. This is, criminal. And I think, that goes back to this issue of enforcement that you've brought up. We need to enforce these regulations that are in place, especially before they go away, as this current
Yeah,
administration has tried to remove so many of them.
right. Right. Yeah.
So, You know, advocates and academics like yourself have been calling for many years for a national food policy, something that's, better and bigger and more inclusive than
Mhm.
the Farm Bill. And, because of COVID-19 and everything that's sort of been uncovered, what was invisible is now visible. People are really understanding in bigger ways where their food comes from. Do you think now is the time to sort of reinvigorate that discussion around creating a national food policy?
Well, I always think it's time to do that. And certainly there are groups of people who are suggesting food policies of one kind or another. And there have been suggestions for years now. One thing is, the obvious, the Government Accountability Office has been trying for more than 40 years to get the food safety functions of the Department of Agriculture and the FDA unified into one. And there were steps that were being taken in that direction, but those have that pressure has stopped. But I think if you were going to sit down and design a food policy from scratch, the one we have is there for historical reasons. And if you were going to do this from scratch, you would want to have a food policy that promotes the health of people and the environment, that
Right.
links agriculture and public health with the goal of producing healthy diets that are available, affordable, and accessible to everyone in the population. Um, and that is environmentally sustainable and protects against bad effects on climate change. And it's quite possible to do that. We know what kind of a diet it is. Fortunately, the same diet does both human health and environmental health. So that makes it a lot easier. And that's a largely, but not necessarily exclusively, plant-based diet with less meat and more vegetables
Sure.
and less processed food, I think also. And that's possible to do if we had the political will to do it. And it was interesting to me that Commission of the Lancet, one of the a British medical journal, last year came out with a diet for planetary health and a proposal for how you go about dealing with undernutrition, overnutrition, problems of obesity, and climate change at one fell swoop. And you do that by eating less meat, eating more vegetables, and linking food production to consumption in a way that's not done presently. So we could fix that. And they identified what the problems were. The problems were that you have weak governments that are sold out to corporations, have been
Right.
captured by corporations. And we certainly see that in a lot of federal policy in the United States. You have weak civil society, so that there's the thousands of organizations that are working on food movement issues are not united. I mean, that's what you're
Right.
trying to do with Food Tank, that I think is so important, is trying to bring all these groups together so they collaborate on working towards the same issues and try to achieve and advocate for the same goals. Um, so, the complaints that the food movement doesn't have any real power, I think is true to some extent. I think it's more powerful than it appears, but it's true to some extent that it's not organized into one enormous coalition that
Hmm.
demands changes in the way that might actually get changes. And
Right.
that's what we're all working toward.
Right. We are not as powerful, at least financially, as the big agriculture lobbies and, all of those organizations that are working to promote meat or pork or chicken consumption. So I think we are sort of at this crucial time in history, though, where I think, again, consumers, eaters are more interested in where their food comes from than ever before. And we have to sort of hop on this moment, take this moment and run with it so that we can build that unified sort of coalition that can vote on these issues in a really cohesive way where we can make change.
I totally agree. I'm
And
with
I
you
mean,
on that one.
but I mean, that's what you've been advocating for your entire sort of career, people using the knowledge they have around food to make that the both those personal and political changes. And I wonder over your career if you've been really surprised by something that you never thought would change, but then did.
Well, I have a very personal one on that. I mean, I can see over the last 30 years enormous changes in the food system that a lot of young people can't see because they haven't been around for 30 years. Their food in supermarkets is much better than it used to be. You can get fruits and vegetables all year round in a way that you couldn't 30 years ago. There are more farmers markets. There's more organic food. There are more community supported agricultural operations. There's much more interest in this kind of thing. And, my personal example is food studies programs. When
Hmm.
we started our food studies program at NYU in 1996, there was a program in gastronomy at Boston University. That was the only one. But food studies, I mean, I remember having dinner one night with the NYU provost at around the time that we were just starting the program. And he said, I don't understand. What's food studies? Why would anybody want to study about food? Why is food important enough to study about? And, I'm pretty good at answering that question. And I spent an hour talking to him, and he never did get it. He was a mathematician. Um, and he just wasn't interested in anything social. He wasn't interested in society and politics and economics or in any of the other huge areas of study that food connects to so forcefully. But if you go on the website of the society, the Americans, the Association for the Study of Food and Society, which represents food studies scholars, there are probably 60 food studies programs throughout the world now.
That's
So
exciting.
that's pretty exciting. And, to me, that's an example of public interest in these areas, public recognition that food connects to the most important problems that society has to deal with, food insecurity, obesity, and its consequences, and climate change, right off the top, affect everybody on the planet. One or the other affects everybody. Certainly, climate change affects everyone on the planet. And these are hugely important issues, and food is a wonderful entry point to get into them because you can talk to people about food and politics in a way that you cannot talk to people about other kinds of politics because
Absolutely.
politics is off-putting. It's people think it's dirty and they don't want to get involved in it. And somehow with food, it's easier.
Yeah, food is a great entry point for a lot of these things for sure. You mentioned the climate connection. I feel like it's only recently, maybe in the last decade, though, that people have sort of understood, regular eaters and also environmental organizations have understood the connections between food and climate and started talking about it in a bigger way. Is that something that surprised you that the environmental movement didn't take that on earlier?
Yeah, it does. And it did surprise me. And it also surprised me that the food movement didn't take it on earlier. But I think that has to do with the big disconnect between food production and consumption. And they have always been um, thought of separately. So,
Sure.
on the one hand, you look at what people are eating. On the other hand, you look at agriculture. Agriculture seems very remote from what you get at the supermarket, and making the connection between agriculture and what's at the supermarket has been something quite recent. That's where food systems come in. The big buzzwords that are really new in the last 5 to 10 years are food systems,
Hmm.
which describe the totality of what happens to a food from the time it's produced to the time it's consumed and wasted. And in order to, if you're going to talk about what people are eating, you have to talk about food consumption in the context of food production, and everything else that happens to it. And that's one of the things that COVID-19 has pointed out so forcefully, that people can see that in a way that they never were able to see it before. And then the other is this ultra-processed concept, which is also relatively new and refers to a category of junk foods, to put it bluntly, that there's now just tons of research that shows that eating ultra processed foods is not good for your health or for the
Sure.
planet. You know.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. You've talked about, some of the things that have come up because of COVID, and I think another big one is transparency and traceability in the food system. People really wanting to know every stage and trying to figure out, exactly where their food comes from, what the animal's name was, where it lived, those kinds of things. Do
Right.
you do you think that kind of information is going to get smarter over time, or will we forget about it once COVID is over?
Oh no, I think there's a growing interest in that, and for all the right reasons. I mean, this is something that that is where the personal gets political, because um, I mean, people don't really understand how industrial food production works. They're not supposed to understand it. You're supposed to go to a supermarket and buy chicken parts and never think that those wings or those thighs or those legs actually came from a bird.
Right.
And you certainly don't want to think about how that bird was raised. And I think that as more and more comes out about how these systems work, how chicken production works. There have been movies about it over the past 10 years, but COVID-19 has really pointed out um, how the system works and how bad it is, not only for the animals and birds themselves, but also for the people who are working in those situations, who are
Sure.
often immigrants, often people of color, often not getting sick leave, often not being paid very well.
Right.
These are revelations that have come out of this pandemic that I think it's really terrific that people are recognizing this now, and maybe we'll end up with a food system that pays its workers adequately. What a con-
Absolutely.
what a
I
concept!
know. Wouldn't that be great? No, I feel like the pandemic has really put a human face on these. We didn't think of them as essential. We didn't think of them maybe even as human before this. We just thought of, factories sort of putting out this stuff. And now that we know that people are behind all this, I think real change will come about. I'm interested, I have this sort of fascination with technology and its misuses, and also some of the benefits that it could provide to the food and agriculture system. And I'm wondering, you mentioned it in the book, your sort of thoughts on technology. Could you share those?
Well, I'm of the generation that doesn't believe in technology very much.
Is that true?
You know,
We're doing this. You,
as,
you
as
get
I
it.
like, as I like to put it, I'm technologically challenged. Yeah. And I'm teaching an online course this fall. Boy, this was a steep learning curve, let me tell you. Yeah, it's interesting. It's been an interesting experience. I have mixed feelings about it. The I think there are ways in which technology can do wonderful things for the food system, but that's not generally what technology has done. The use of technology in food production has mainly been to increase the profits of the producers of those foods. That's been its purpose. It's
Right.
been successful in doing that. Um, and I guess biotechnology, food biotechnology is the best example of that, where the promise of food biotechnology right from the beginning was that it would address problems in food production that have been very difficult to deal with. And it would help the developing world grow food under conditions of poor soil, poor water, poor climate, and increase productivity under those conditions. But that's not what happened.
Right.
What happened was they focused on temperate zone agriculture and corn, basically corn and soybeans, which is feed for animals or fuel for cars, and not food for people because it was more profitable to do it that way. So, in situations where I've seen technology used aimed at food for people, and I would say I was a skeptic about um, urban growing of vegetable greens, for example, until I actually went to a few plants and looked at how they were doing it when they get their energy problem solved, so that they're
Sure.
not spending fortunes on energy in order to grow these things. Then I think it may be worthwhile doing that, because there will be greens in the middle of Newark, New Jersey, that are being sold at the same price as the other greens. I don't know whether they're making a profit or not. I don't have any idea. But I mean, it's something that's possible, and
Mhm.
maybe it'll be useful in the future. But I think we could do our non-technological uh, food system work much better than we're doing it. And we certainly could grow food more sustainably and under better conditions and under less polluting conditions. And we should be growing food that way.
Yeah,
It's not only
that's
that
great.
we could, we should be.
Absolutely. Yeah, technology is not a silver bullet. And just to address maybe that question about, are those indoor farms that are growing greens like the Bowery or Gotham Greens, they lost a lot of their outlets for sales because of restaurant closures, but then that was picked up by grocery stores. So I think they're remaining even. They're not, making a ton of money, but they were able to sell to grocery stores when supply chains from California or Mexico were sort of stopped because of COVID. So I think that's sort of another silver bullet maybe, or silver lining to COVID is some of those.
There's one point I want to make. I'm not opposed to profit. I'm
Oh, of
really,
course.
I'm really not. I am opposed to greed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Here, here. Um,
Um,
I
you know,
wanted to talk. Go ahead.
I like, I want the food system aimed at feeding people and protecting the planet. And I think we could do that. All we need is political will and civil society pushing our legislators to do the right thing.
Absolutely. And that again is more important than this year than probably ever before. I want to go back. You were talking about the online course that you're teaching for undergraduates
Mhm.
around the food system and COVID-19. And if you can share some of your insights, I know this class is currently happening, and but it would be great. Like what kinds of questions are you getting from the students?
Well, it's I don't even know how to begin to talk about what a strange experience this is. The lectures were pre-recorded in short segments of 5 to 15 minutes each. I was told that anything longer than 10 minutes nobody would watch, which is kind of interesting. I'm used to giving 50-minute lectures, and and I'm covering in the class. I'm covering what has happened with COVID in the food system. The three things we talked about: what's happening with the meat packers, the idea that food was being destroyed while people are
Right.
online for food, what's happening in schools, and so forth, with a focus on food insecurity, which is an enormous problem right now. I don't know why anybody would be surprised that it's an enormous problem. 40 million people are out of work on unemployment insurance. Where are they supposed to have the money to buy food? So food insecurity, a huge problem right now. Uh, Obesity and its consequent raising of risks for type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and so forth. I'm talking a lot about ultra-processed foods, food systems, and half the class is on the problems. The undernutrition, overnutrition, and the environment. The other half the class is on what to do about it. How do you personally advocate for food system change? How do we get societies to advocate for food system change? How do we get the world to advocate for food system change? And then the last chapter in the book is about how you do advocacy.
That's great.
Because I want students to become food advocates.
That's fantastic.
That's my goal.
That's great. Before I ask the final question that's related to that, I want to make sure that people know where to get your book. They can go to ucpress.edu. Again, that's ucpress.edu. You don't have to buy it from some of those other companies who will remain nameless. You can go directly to the publisher.
The nameless company is selling it at the same price.
Well, good. So you should buy it from the publisher. You can follow her food politics blog at foodpolitics.com. And you can read about her almost everywhere, including Food Tank and thecounter.org and many other outlets. So this idea of teaching, young folks to become food advocates, what's your advice for the 18 to 22-year-olds who are, doing probably classes online, either in dorms by themselves or at home? How can they take action now to become the food advocates of the future?
Well, they can pick up the phone and call their local representatives. They can write emails to their local representatives. They can write lectures. They can write letters to their local representatives. And if in their own district, legislators say that hearing from constituents is still the most powerful message that gets through to them. And that they want to hear from constituents. And if they hear, one probably doesn't do very much, but how about organizing a few people in your class to write a letter with several signatures on it or separate letters? Let your local legislators know what you think about these kinds of issues and what you want them to do. One of the things that you try to teach advocates to do is to have a specific goal. And if you're going to talk to legislators, there has to be a legislative goal. Right. What is it that you want them to do? I have to be really clear about that, but it doesn't take very much to figure out how to do that. And there are terrific books to read about how to become an effective advocate. They work really well. There are loads of organizations to join that are doing work that might be exactly the kind of work that I assume that everybody who's watching this belongs to Food Tank, but if you don't belong, join it. That would be a good first step. One thing, because one of the things you do, Danny, is you publish lists of organizations. And those lists are immensely useful. I once had a student complain that she didn't know of any food organizations working on food issues. And so I said, well, you're an undergraduate. How about doing a research project? And she came back a week later and said, this is impossible. There's too many of them. There are just too many. I don't know. This was just in New York City. I can't imagine if you were trying to do it nationally. And so you find an organization that's working on an issue that you care about, join that organization, support it, send them money if you have any money to send, or at least join their letter writing or email campaigns. I'm not sure. A lot of things come through that ask for clicking. I'm not convinced that clicking is very useful.
Sure.
Although I suppose you could count up the number of clicks and that might have some effect. But the way the political system works is it works with money and it works with complaints. So at least complain. At the very
noisy.
At the very least, make noise.
Right.
Or maybe
Right, right.
Beautiful Trouble. There's an organization that teaches how to do unusual kinds of advocacy called Beautiful Trouble. That's a good
That's
one
great.
to join too.
I love that. That's a wonderful way to end this. Get loud, make beautiful trouble. Marion, you are my inspiration. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. A reminder that this episode will also be on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. Marion, stay safe and well. The world needs you now more than ever.
Thank you.
Thank you.